Good evening. I want to start with a question. When was the last time you felt fully alive? Not busy, not productive, but alive, connected, present, and purposeful. Because for me, the truth is, for a long time, I couldn't remember. I was checking boxes, saying yes to everything, constantly moving, but getting nowhere. And then something changed. I didn't change my job. I didn't move cities. I didn't win the lottery. I changed 5 things, 5 habits, 1 week, and it rearranged the trajectory of my life. So tonight, I'm not going to offer you a magic formula. I'm going to offer you something more honest. 5 small, practical shifts that you can begin this week. Habits that rewired how I think, how I show up, and how I lead my life. Let me tell you a truth many of us quietly live with. Most mornings don't feel like a fresh start. They feel like a race we didn't sign up for. That was my reality for years. The alarm would go off, and before my eyes had even adjusted to the light, I was already scrolling. My brain, not even fully awake, was drowning in headlines, to-do lists, emails from people I hadn't yet seen, and notifications demanding attention I hadn't chosen to give. It wasn't just a habit, it was a way of life. And it felt normal because that's what so many of us do. But just because something is normal doesn't mean it's healthy. The shift didn't come from reading a book or attending a seminar. It came from a moment of quiet desperation. One morning, I noticed how my heart was already racing before I had even spoken to another human being. Not because something was wrong, but because I had handed over control of my attention the moment the day began. That morning, I did something that sounds ridiculously small. I bought a $10 0-cents alarm clock, and I left my phone in the kitchen. The next day, when I woke up, it was different. No buzz, no glow, just quiet. I made coffee. I sat by the window. 5 minutes, no screen, no scrolling, no outside voices, just stillness. And in that silence, something profound happened. I remembered what it feels like to own your morning. You see, the first few minutes of our day are like setting coordinates on a compass. If we start even 1 degree off course, consumed by comparison, anxiety, or urgency, we'll end up miles away from where we hope to be. Our minds are vulnerable in those early moments. They're pliable, like wet cement. What we press into them stays with us. Research from the University of British Columbia supports what I felt that morning. They found that people who consumed negative media within the first 30 minutes of their day experienced more than a 27% increase in overall stress throughout the rest of the day. That's not a productivity tip, that's a neurological reality. What you feed your brain first becomes the tone for everything else. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, 5 minutes without my phone, that won't change my life. But it does, not because the time itself is long, but because the message it sends to your brain is powerful. I am in control. I decide what matters. I decide what gets my attention. After just 1 week of this new routine, I noticed things shifting. I wasn't as reactive. I wasn't rushing through breakfast or mentally checking emails while brushing my teeth. I was more patient with my kids, more intentional in conversations, more present, even during the most ordinary parts of my day. I had started responding to life, not just reacting to it. The irony is, we've built these devices to make life more efficient, more connected, and they do. But if we're not careful, they also rob us of the one thing we need to thrive: attention, presence, choice. This isn't about becoming a monk or swearing off technology. It's about reclaiming something sacred, the beginning of your day, because how you start your day is often how you live your day, and how you live your day is how you live your life. All it took was one decision, one tiny change, and everything began to feel different. Not louder, not faster, just more mine. I didn't start writing to become a writer. I wasn't chasing some creative breakthrough or trying to publish anything. In fact, no one was ever meant to read what I wrote. It wasn't curated, it wasn't pretty, and most of the time it wasn't even coherent. But it was mine. Just 1 page a day. That's all I committed to. not a journal with prompts, not a productivity planner, just a blank sheet and a pen. Every night, I wrote down whatever came to mind, what I had learned, what frustrated me, what made me uncomfortable, what I was grateful for. At first, it felt awkward, almost pointless. I caught myself wondering, is this really doing anything? I wasn't solving world problems. I wasn't even solving my own problems, if I'm honest. But something subtle started happening. That one page became a mirror, not the kind that shows you how you look, but the kind that reveals how you live. You see, when life moves fast, we don't really see it. We experience it, but we don't understand it. Writing slows it down. It gives us the space to step back and notice what's actually happening inside us, around us, and because of us. It pulls us out of autopilot. I started noticing how often I said yes when my gut screamed no. I realized how many days I went without having a single meaningful conversation. I recognized how frequently I let urgency win over importance. What surprised me most was that some of the most powerful entries came from the most ordinary days. One evening, I wrote about how a barista smiled at me in a way that made me feel human again after a rough morning. Another night, I wrote about how drained I felt after a Zoom call, only to realize I hadn't said a single thing I actually believed. These weren't breakthroughs, they were reminders. Reminders of who I am when I'm not performing, when I'm not rushing, when I'm simply paying attention. There's a difference between having experiences and learning from them. Most of us are so busy collecting days, we forget to extract the meaning from them. Reflection is how we turn experience into wisdom. And it doesn't require hours of therapy or years of hindsight. Sometimes it just takes one honest page. I think we underestimate how much we already know about ourselves, about what we need, about what truly matters. But that wisdom stays buried under distraction and noise. Writing gives it a voice. Not a loud one, not a perfect one, but a voice that says, I see you, I hear you. Let's make sense of this together. One night, I wrote about a mistake I made at work. A small one, really. But it snowballed into this deep realization that I'd been driven more by fear of failure than by love for the work itself. I wouldn't have seen that if I hadn't taken the time to pause and listen. That single page helped me lead differently the next day, more open, less defensive, more human. This habit didn't just help me track my days, it helped me shape them. It made me more intentional, more grounded, and more aware. The page became a safe place to ask hard questions and to celebrate small wins. It became a ritual of self-respect. And here's the truth. When we give ourselves that space to reflect, even for 5 minutes, we're not just writing, we're building a relationship with ourselves. A relationship that, in the long run, determines everything else, you said. Burnout isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up not in dramatic collapse, but in quiet exhaustion, the kind that follows you through the day and lingers even after 8 hours of sleep. For the longest time, I believed it was because I was doing too much. Too many deadlines, too many responsibilities, too many people to please. But the truth I eventually came to realize is this. We're not burning out because we're overworked. We're burning out because we're overwhelmed with things we haven't said. Every day we carry little tensions, misunderstandings, frustrations, feelings of being overlooked, dismissed, or unheard. And we don't speak them. We tell ourselves it's not the right time. We convince ourselves we're being too sensitive. We avoid the discomfort, hoping it'll just go away on its own. But emotions that are buried alive don't die. They grow, and slowly, silently, they begin to weigh us down. That weight doesn't just live in our minds. It shows up in our shoulders, in our sleep, in how short we get with the people we love most. So I made a decision. One honest conversation a day. That was it. It didn't have to be deep or emotional, it just had to be true. Some days it looked like telling a coworker, I felt shut down in that meeting. Can we talk about it? Not with blame, but with curiosity and respect. Other days it was calling my sister and saying, I know we haven't talked much lately, and I miss you. Can we reconnect? I didn't try to fix anything in those moments. I just said what was real. These conversations weren't always easy. In fact, they often made my heart race. But here's what surprised me. They didn't leave me feeling drained. They left me feeling alive. It was like opening a window in a stuffy room. Suddenly, there was air again. Honesty, it turns out, is oxygen for the soul. And what I discovered is that we don't need to have perfect words. We just need the courage to be real. Something powerful happens when we speak the truth with kindness. We stop pretending, we stop performing. And in that moment, something shifts. Not just between you and the other person, but inside of you. You stop living with the constant weight of what hasn't been said. You give yourself permission to show up fully, flaws and all. And when you do that, people respond. Because everyone's starving for authenticity. We're all walking around with stories we're scared to tell and feelings we're scared to express. So when someone goes first, it gives the rest of us permission to be honest too. What amazed me most was how often these conversations healed things I didn't even realize were broken. A simple, I'm sorry, or that hurt me, created space for deeper connection. Even the uncomfortable moments brought a kind of relief, because it's not conflict that destroys relationships, it's avoidance. It's pretending everything is fine when your gut knows. The best part? As I practiced this habit, it got easier. Not because the fear went away, but because the freedom on the other side became worth it. And little by little, my life started to feel lighter. My relationships grew stronger. My days felt more grounded. Not because anything around me changed dramatically, but because I had finally made room for honesty. And in that space, I found clarity. I found connection. I found myself again. You said, this one seemed almost too simple to matter. 10 minutes, a walk, no headphones, no phone, no productivity hack, and yet it ended up being one of the most transformative things I've done in years. We live in a world where silence is almost extinct. Every moment, waiting in line, sitting in traffic, walking from one place to another, is filled with some form of noise. I used to tell myself it was productive. I was learning, I said. I had a podcast for inspiration, an audiobook for business tips, a playlist to keep me energized. My ears were never empty, and neither was my mind. But beneath that constant input, something wasn't right. I was always on, always absorbing, but never digesting. I had replaced boredom with stimulation, and in doing so, I had unknowingly turned down the volume on the only voice that truly knows what I need, my own. So one day, I left my headphones on the kitchen counter and stepped outside. 10 minutes. No sound but my footsteps, the wind, and the world around me. At first, it felt odd. My brain kept reaching for something to grab onto. A headline, a lyric, a notification. But slowly, something started to shift. The noise didn't fill the space because I didn't let it. And for the first time in a long time, I heard something different. It wasn't silence exactly. It was subtle but clear. My mind, unprompted, began to speak, but not the kind of anxious chatter I was used to. Not the spiraling to-do lists or the replays of yesterday's awkward conversation. This was something deeper, more honest. I heard thoughts I didn't know I had, ideas that had been quietly waiting their turn, emotions that I had pressed down under layers of distraction, grief, gratitude, clarity. And it came not as a wave, but as a gentle reminder. I had been running from stillness under the banner of growth. There's this myth we live by, that busyness is proof of progress, that if we're always consuming, always grinding, we're moving forward. But what if the growth we seek doesn't come from adding more, but from listening more deeply to what's already inside us? 10 minutes a day doesn't sound like much, but it gave me something I hadn't realized I was missing: space. And in that space, I found more than just ideas. I found myself. I found the part of me that isn't trying to impress or improve or outpace anyone else. The part that simply is. Sometimes during those walks, I'd remember something small from my childhood. Other times, I'd feel a wave of emotion rise up with no clear origin. And instead of stuffing it down, I let it move through me. I let it teach me. And I started to understand something I had forgotten. Stillness isn't a luxury. It's a lifeline. We don't need more information. We need more integration. We need time to let what we already know sink in, settle, and shape us. And that only happens when we slow down enough to listen. So now, even when life gets chaotic, I protect those 10 minutes like they matter. Because they do. Not because they help me get more done, but because they remind me who I am when the noise fades. And that version of me, he's worth hearing. There's a question that changed how I see everything. Not just my to-do list, not just my goals, but the way I measure my life. It's only 8 words long, and I ask it every night. What did I do today that mattered? Not what did I finish, not what did I earn, but what mattered. We live in a world that keeps score in very specific ways. Numbers, results, metrics, followers, income, deadlines met, projects completed, and somewhere along the way, we start to confuse what's measurable with what's meaningful. We start believing that productivity is the same thing as purpose, but deep down, we know that's not true. You can have a day full of accomplishments and still feel empty when your head hits the pillow. I know I did. The first night I asked myself that question, I sat in silence for a while. I thought back over my day, emails answered, meetings taken, errands run, and I realized nothing I did that day really mattered, not in a human sense, not in a lasting, memorable, soul-level kind of way. And that realization didn't just sting, it shook me, because I had been busy, I had been efficient, but I hadn't been present. I hadn't offered kindness, created connection, or done anything that made someone else feel seen. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't go another day without at least one thing that mattered. Some days, that thing is simple. A text message to check on a friend I haven't heard from in a while. A 5-minute pause in a hectic day to look someone in the eyes and really listen. Giving my full attention to my kids over dinner instead of reaching for my phone. Other days, it's having a hard conversation that needed to be had, or showing up for someone in a moment that wasn't convenient. It's never about how big the act is, it's about how true it feels. This habit didn't just change how I ended my days, it started to change how I lived them. When I knew that I'd be asking myself that question each night, I began to move through my day differently. I started noticing opportunities to make something matter, a kind word, a small risk, a quiet act of courage. I paid more attention to people, not just tasks. I started measuring success by how deeply I connected, not how quickly I moved. The question became my compass. It pulled me back from distraction. It reminded me that success without significance isn't really success at all. Because if our scoreboard is just money, likes, or completed checkboxes, we'll always be chasing something that never quite satisfies. But if our scoreboard is impact, presence, and meaning, then suddenly even the smallest actions can feel infinite. What surprised me most was that this one simple habit brought me more clarity than any planner or productivity app ever had. It didn't just organize my day, it aligned my life. And on the nights when the answer to that question was nothing, I didn't shame myself. I let it wake me up. I let it teach me. Because awareness is the beginning of change. And asking that question gave me a way back to what really matters. Not someday, not when I have more time, but right now in the ordinary moments of today. So every night, I still ask it. Quietly, honestly, not to check a box, but to check my heart. And every time I do, it brings me home. You said 5 habits, 1 week. That's all it took. Not to transform everything overnight, but to begin seeing things through a different lens. And that shift in perspective changed more than just my schedule. It started to change me. Because what we do repeatedly becomes who we are. Not just the big choices, not the dramatic moments, but the quiet, consistent patterns. The way we start our mornings, the words we say when no one's watching, the way we treat others in small moments. These are the things that write the story of our lives. We often think change has to be loud, fast, disruptive, that something huge has to happen to wake us up, a breakdown, a failure, a diagnosis. But real change rarely announces itself like that. Most of the time it begins in silence, with one small act of intention, with one choice that no one claps for, but that you know matters. You don't have to wait for rock bottom. You don't have to wait until everything's falling apart. You can begin now, wherever you are, however you feel, with whatever you have. It's easy to get overwhelmed when we think of everything we want to fix, about our habits, our relationships, our careers, our health. But overwhelm keeps us stuck. The power comes in simplicity. Pick one thing, one small habit, one choice that honors who you want to become. Maybe it's putting your phone away first thing in the morning. Maybe it's writing a single page at night to reflect. Maybe it's speaking honestly with one person. Maybe it's walking without distraction or asking yourself a better question at the end of the day. You don't need to do them all. You just need to start. And then pay attention, not to how others respond, not to how quickly your life changes, but to what stirs inside you. That's the signal. That quiet shift in how you see yourself, in how you move through the world, that's the sign that you're heading in the right direction. We spend so much time chasing the good life, thinking it's somewhere down the road, after we've done enough, earned enough, fixed enough. But what if the good life isn't a place you arrive at? What if it's something you begin to build, one mindful habit at a time? What if it's less about adding more and more about coming back to what truly matters? You don't need a 5-year plan to begin. You need 1 week. 1 week to interrupt the cycle, to try a different rhythm, to hear yourself again beneath the noise. 1 week to act not out of habit, but out of intention. That's all it takes to begin again. And when you do, you'll realize something powerful. That the smallest things, when done with meaning, can change everything. That clarity comes not in the rush, but in the pause. That fulfillment isn't found in chasing more, but in choosing better. So if you're waiting for a sign, let this be it. You're allowed to start small. You're allowed to begin again. Not next year, not when it's convenient, now. Because the life you want, the one that feels true, purposeful, grounded, it's not built in a weekend, but it can begin in a week.